Today in Across the Fence, the plight of the honeybee in Vermont. Bee populations are declining, but you can help, and our experts will tell you how. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. Today's program is about the issues regarding the losses in bee populations over the past several years and what you can do to help improve the situation. Joining me are Chaz Mraz and Sid Bosworth. Chaz is the owner of Champlain Apiaries in Middlebury, and Sid is an agronomist with UVM Extension and the university's Plant and Soil Science Department. Sid is also a hobbyist beekeeper. Welcome to both of you. Now, Chaz, tell us a little bit about the situation with honeybees in Vermont. Is the problem still the same as colony collapse syndrome that's been in the news?
Well, bees in Vermont are under similar stresses that they are under in the rest of the world. Bee mortality is very high, production is down. CCD is a unique part of that problem.
Mm-hmm. And what is it exactly?
Well, CCD, it looks like, as we look back at it, it was very confusing in the beginning, that it was an actual event that occurred. It occurred here in the winter of 2004 and 2005. And it was basically a nosema, which is a bee dysentery. Mm-hmm. A nosema apis was displaced by another nosema, Nosema cerana. And that caused this dramatic die-off. The bees were all already under a tremendous amount of stress, and mainly from the varroa mite. And that is probably the straw that broke the camel's back, sort of, at that time.
What else do we know about why honeybees are in decline?
The major reasons are probably the varroa mite, which you can see on the screen there right now. The varroa mite is sort of like a tick to bees. Of course, if it was on us, it would be the size of a pie plate.
Wow, yeah.
And it's very difficult for them to get resistance to the mite. There is some resistance building in the bees. But I think it's fair to say that the bees would be having a much easier time, even with viruses, even nosema, and even pesticides, if the varroa mite wasn't there. It vectors disease and things in the bees, and making it very difficult for them to fight off these other stresses.
Mm-hmm. And there are other reasons too, I said.
Yeah, I think, and Chaz and I have talked about this a lot, there's a lot of factors affecting, I think, the bee decline or the challenges of keeping bees, besides some of the diseases and insects. But one factor is lack of resources for the bees, food resources, nectar and pollen. We're starting into the spring, which usually is very abundant, but one of the concerns and one of the reasons that Chaz and I are working on some projects is the lack of resources in the summer, midsummer and late summer, for nectar and pollen sources for bees.
What are some of the sources?
Well, a major one, and the picture on the screen shows white clover. This is a major legume used by dairy farmers for their hay crops. And this has been this and other clovers and other forage legumes have been important sources of nectar and pollen for beekeepers for years.
Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of things that bees like that homeowners don't, which is a problem. And let's talk a little bit about some insecticides. And there's a particular group of insecticides that's been bad for bees.
Well, yes, the neonicotinoids are very controversial right now. There's a lot of studies being done. They're basically a new variety of neonicotinoid of pesticide for agricultural use and homeowner use as
Mm-hmm.
well. They're meant to replace organic phosphates, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The problem I have with neonicotinoids is that these are conditionally approved pesticides by the EPA, and they're not doing any monitoring. They're not doing monitoring of our waters, of our soils, of our environment, basically, even of human impact. And I think that's quite negligent on that part. I would like to see a lot more done to make sure that these products are safe. I think possibly some are safe, some aren't safe. but we have to get through that, and it may be a large factor in the problems we're having with bees.
And isn't one of the problems too that folks are maybe not following the directions on how to use these chemicals?
That can be a very big issue, and it's very important to follow the instructions. It's very important to not spray and bloom. There's good guidelines on these products, and the best thing is to avoid using them if you can. Do you really need to use them? Is there another alternative?
If I can add, I think a lot of people may think these are used just by farmers, but actually many of our products that you buy at garden centers or hardware stores have this group of insecticides, that are used for, lawn grub control or, insect shrub control, those kinds of things for the home gardener. And so one concern we have is overuse of these or misuse by landowners. And as Chaz said, one reason they're so popular is that they aren't as toxic to humans or mammals, but they, along with many insecticides, are very toxic to bees.
In fact, we've been talking about honeybees, but there's also evidence that native bee populations have also declined.
Yeah, when we talk about native bees, we're talking about bumblebees and certain solitary bees and other bees that you see in your garden regularly. They're not the wild bees that people think of as living in a tree, which is often the Apis mellifera, which we keep in beehives that have swarmed away. Those bees used to live wildly in trees, and without the beekeeper now, they tend not to be there anymore, not there very long, maybe for a season. The one problem that we have with native bees is there's not a lot of data of what was the situation before, what's the situation now, though there is some very good evidence that they are in decline as well. And we have to, the big difference is historical data. We don't have quite enough of it, but there's been some studies that show that there are some problems out there.
I know you wanted to add something, Sid.
Well, I think the importance of native bees and native pollinators has really grown for agricultural use as well. With the decline in honeybees, some important crops that really rely on pollination, there's a lot of effort now to look at can native bees help supplement what honeybees have for years provided for those services.
Mm-hmm. I know in other states they rely heavily on bees.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about the work that you're doing at UVM regarding bees and other insect pollinators.
Sure. So Chaz and I were fortunate to get a grant a couple of years ago through the USDA SARE program. Mm-hmm. And it was to work with a couple of the farms that actually Chaz keeps some of his bee yards on in Addison County and up in Chittenden County at this point. Mm-hmm. And we're focusing on, again, looking at unique ways of incorporating more legumes into our hay crops that would provide nectar and pollen in that midsummer to late summer time. This picture shows one of our sites where it's an alfalfa field, but we've included different white clover varieties into this study to see if they can provide bloom over a longer period of time. White clover has the unique feature that after the hay is cut, it will flush out and bloom within a week, and it'll continue to bloom until that hay's cut again. So we're trying to just see if this can help to provide some resources. These pictures are from some of the plot work, some students last summer collecting data on clover head counts, so we're trying to collect that kind of data to see if they can provide a significant amount that would be useful for honeybee producers, honey producers like Chaz. Mm-hmm. At part of the project, we're also monitoring native bees, and this is one of the students sweeping for bumblebees. It's a little tricky work.
I would think so.
But we did see a significant number of bumblebees working our plots last summer. So they're carefully counting and trying to identify some of those species.
And so, Chaz, I know you have a lot of bee yards throughout the Champlain Valley. How do you work with surrounding farmers and their landowners to make sure of the health and safety of your bees?
Well, we've gotten great cooperation from farmers. The city and I have obviously gotten great cooperation. I've done some direct things. I purchased seed for farmers, but most importantly is just getting the word out has really done amazing things. Farmers help farmers, and I'm a farmer as well. I farm bees instead of cows, and just getting the word out to them and working with them on these different ideas, getting them to plant white clover, make sure the seed is in their hay. There's a lot of aggressive cutting of hay, and the problem is really in the midsummer time. It's not in the spring here in Vermont, but we need to get something that's in bloom, especially when the corn is tasseling out and things that we don't necessarily want the bees to go to that are treated with neonicotinoids, for example.
So your effort is to inform farmers to say, wait before you cut a crop of hay?
Well, I can't take anything away from a farmer. They're my best friends. Our main hay, production is from their hay fields. So yes, I mean if a farmer lets one cut of hay go to seed, that's great, a great benefit for us, especially if it's in the midsummer area time. But we're looking at kind of seed strategies to get a bloom out there for the bees.
You know, one aspect of this project we have is we're not going to ask dairy farmers to cut their hay any later to get bloom. That's an important part of their profitability, is to put up high quality, high nutritional forage for their cows. So again, we're trying to look at mixtures that might actually achieve both goals. It's a little lofty. We're still collecting data. We're not ready to recommend yet, but that is an important point. Is because dairy farmers cut earlier, there's less bloom than we might have had 50 years ago. So there's less of those resources for bees, but it's so important for dairy farmers to maintain that quality.
So by mixing in some of the clover seed, as you mentioned earlier, they bloom right after the hay's cut?
Right after the hay's cut, and their quality really doesn't drop as fast. So I think we can still maintain quality.
Now you're also talking about a no-till situation as well.
Well, so for some of our pastures or even hayfields, incorporating some of the clovers and other legumes, we've looked at drilling in. Using no-till drills or overseeding, what they call frost seeding is another method. So that's been part of our project as well, is to use the drill that UVM Extension has in Middlebury that farmers have been using to renovate their pastures with clovers and legumes.
So we've been talking about farmers mostly, but what can homeowners do? Because there are some things that people can do that will significantly help.
Yeah.
Well, one of the main things is to stop killing your dandelions in your yard. Dandelion is a really important flower, an early nectar source and pollen source for bees. If you can create a safe environment for bees in your garden, diversity is extremely important. So if you can plant flowers that are good for pollinators, then that's an excellent thing to do.
As a matter of fact, a lot of greenhouses now will identify plants that are good for pollinators.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, Sid, any other tips for homeowners?
Yes. Again, many of these insecticide products people can purchase, from their garden center or hardware store, and you just want to be really careful. Not only the neonicotinoids, but many of these insecticides can harm bees if not applied properly. So, some guidelines are certainly avoid insecticides if possible. Look at alternatives. Look at resistant varieties of shrubs and grasses for your lawns that can avoid that problem. You want to really know you've got the pest, identify it before you ever apply, and only apply where the pest is a problem. For lawns, for example, I think it's better to spot apply versus using these 2+ programs where the insecticide is spread with all the fertilizer, where you don't really need it.
Right.
And then certainly read the label and look for these bee warnings. EPA requires these bee warnings. and
Maybe plant some clover.
and plant some clover in your lawn. Most garden centers sell this, what they call Dutch white clover, which is a small one that can tolerate mowing, like for a lawn.
Now, where can people get more information? I know you have a website.
I do. That's dedicated for this project we have, and I think it's www.pss.uvm.edu/VT crops. That's a very simple one. Or you can Google Vermont crops homepage and Vermont forage crops homepage and get this site. And there's a link to this project we have, and I have other links to other resources. So if homeowners are interested in pollinator plants, I've got links to the Xerces Society and some of the other work that folks at UVM are doing.
Well, terrific. I want to thank you both for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.